There is something far more unsettling than any horror movie jump scare, and it sits quietly behind glass with a handwritten warning that simply reads, "Do not touch." The real Annabelle doll is not the porcelain demon you saw on screen, but a small Raggedy Ann toy that looks almost harmless at first glance. Yet the story surrounding it is darker, colder, and in many ways more disturbing than anything Hollywood dramatized in the Conjuring Universe. In 1970, a nursing student claimed the doll began moving on its own inside her apartment. It would change positions, appear in different rooms, and leave handwritten notes on parchment paper that the owners insisted they never bought. According to paranormal investigators Ed and Lorraine Warren, the case was not about a possessed toy, but about something non-human attempting to manipulate belief and fear. The Warrens concluded that an inhuman spirit was attaching itself to the doll as a conduit. They warned that such entities often begin with subtle acts, building trust before escalating to aggression. What makes this chilling is not spectacle but psychology. The events described were quiet, incremental, almost mundane, which is exactly what makes them believable. Unlike the films Annabelle and Annabelle Creation, the real artifact was never said to sprint across rooms or physically attack in dramatic fashion. Instead, witnesses described scratches, sudden nausea, and a growing sense of oppression in confined spaces. The doll was eventually locked inside a wooden and glass case in the Warrens' Occult Museum in Connecticut. A priest reportedly blessed the case to contain whatever influence remained. Visitors over the decades have claimed to feel dizziness, anxiety, or unexplained emotional shifts when standing too close. Skeptics argue that suggestion and expectation shape those reactions, but belief itself can be a powerful trigger inside the human brain. What deepens the mystery is how consistent the narrative has remained for over 50 years. The doll has not changed appearance. The warnings have not been revised. The case file has not grown more theatrical with time. If anything, its restraint makes it more unsettling. Horror on screen relies on spectacle, yet real fear grows from ambiguity. Annabelle does not need glowing eyes or exaggerated violence. It represents the idea that something unseen can influence the physical world subtly and patiently. And perhaps that is what makes the real story more frightening than fiction. It suggests that evil does not always roar. Sometimes it waits quietly, stitched into fabric, smiling softly from behind glass. What makes the real Annabelle case even more disturbing is not just what allegedly happened inside that small apartment in 1970, but what followed after the doll was removed. According to Ed Warren and Lorraine Warren, the activity did not end quietly. They claimed that once the doll was placed in their vehicle, the car repeatedly stalled and lost control, as if something resisted being relocated. Only after holy water was used, they said, did the mechanical issues stop. Skeptics call it coincidence. Believers see a pattern. And the unsettling part is that both explanations feel possible. The doll was eventually secured inside what became the Warrens' Occult Museum in Connecticut. Unlike the dramatic scenes portrayed in The Conjuring or Annabelle, the real containment method was simple but symbolic. A wooden case, reinforced glass, a warning label, and periodic blessings. There were no cinematic chains shaking in the dark. There was silence. And silence can be far more unnerving than noise. Over the years, visitors reported incidents after mocking or taunting the doll. One widely repeated account describes a young man who allegedly banged on the glass and challenged the spirit to harm him. According to the Warrens, he later died in a motorcycle accident. There is no verified public record directly linking the two events, and correlation does not equal causation. Yet the story persists, retold in whispers, amplified by human tendency to connect tragedy with the supernatural. Fear thrives in narrative gaps. The mind fills them eagerly. Psychologically, objects like Annabelle function as vessels for projection. Humans are wired to detect agency, even where none exists. When an inanimate object appears to change position or watch us, the brain's threat detection systems activate. Modern neuroscience shows that the amygdala responds rapidly to perceived uncertainty, especially when linked to human-like forms. Dolls occupy an eerie boundary between object and person. They resemble us but remain lifeless. That ambiguity creates discomfort known as the uncanny effect. Annabelle's stitched smile becomes more than fabric. It becomes a mirror reflecting expectation, belief, and fear. But here is where the real terror deepens. Even if every event has a rational explanation, the cultural impact is undeniable. Annabelle transformed from a simple Raggedy Ann doll into a global symbol of haunting. The idea alone influences physiological responses. Heart rate increases. Skin conductivity shifts. Anxiety rises in anticipation. Whether supernatural or psychological, the effect is real inside the body. And that blurs the line between fiction and reality. Perhaps Annabelle's true power is not movement or violence, but suggestion. A quiet object in a locked case, surrounded by decades of testimony, religious ritual, skepticism, and myth. It does nothing visibly dramatic. It simply exists. Waiting. Observed. Interpreted. And sometimes, the most frightening possibility is not that something moves in the dark, but that it never needs to. If we strip away the Hollywood lighting and dramatic music, what remains is far more intellectually unsettling. The real Annabelle case forces us to confront a question that modern science still struggles to answer with certainty. Can belief itself shape perception so powerfully that it alters physical experience? This is where the story shifts from ghost tale into psychological thriller. Researchers studying fear responses have shown that expectation dramatically amplifies sensory interpretation. When someone enters a room already convinced that something is dangerous, the brain primes itself to detect threat. The prefrontal cortex scans for patterns. The amygdala heightens vigilance. Ordinary sounds become signals. Shadows gain intention. In environments associated with objects like Annabelle, visitors often report sudden chills or pressure in the chest. From a neurological standpoint, these sensations can be triggered purely by anticipation. Yet to the person experiencing them, the fear feels external, invasive, almost intelligent. The original account claimed the doll left handwritten messages and changed positions without explanation. Investigators debated whether subtle environmental factors or human intervention could explain the movements. Memory distortion is another factor. Studies in cognitive psychology show that when multiple witnesses discuss an unusual event, their recollections begin to synchronize, sometimes strengthening details that were initially vague. Over time, stories solidify into shared certainty. The more the story is retold, the more cohesive it becomes. However, there is a dimension that keeps the mystery alive. Lorraine Warren insisted that the presence attached to the doll was not a child's spirit, as initially believed, but something deceptive. She described it as inhuman, capable of mimicking innocence to gain trust. Whether one accepts her clairvoyant claims or not, the concept itself is chilling. The idea that something could weaponize empathy challenges our deepest instincts. Humans are wired to protect what appears harmless. A soft fabric doll with stitched cheeks does not trigger immediate fear. That contradiction is what makes the narrative linger. Culturally, Annabelle emerged during a period of renewed interest in demonology and paranormal investigation in the late 20th century. The Warrens' lectures, case files, and museum artifacts fueled a growing fascination with the unseen. Decades later, cinema amplified that fascination globally. Yet the real doll never changed its appearance to match the films. It remained simple. Red yarn hair. Faded fabric. A small triangular nose. Its ordinariness resists spectacle. That resistance paradoxically strengthens its mystique. When viewers compare the cinematic version to the real artifact, many say the real one feels creepier precisely because it looks normal. Horror that feels plausible tends to linger longer in the mind than exaggerated fantasy. The brain does not fear monsters it knows are impossible as deeply as it fears ambiguity. Annabelle exists in that gray zone between skepticism and belief. It cannot be conclusively proven supernatural. It cannot be conclusively dismissed without addressing the testimonies that persist around it. And so the question remains unresolved. Is Annabelle dangerous because of what it is, or because of what we project onto it? Sometimes the most disturbing mysteries are the ones that reflect our own cognitive limits back at us. By the time you reach the end of the Annabelle story, something subtle has already happened. The fear is no longer about a doll in a glass case. It becomes about uncertainty itself. The real artifact never lunges, never screams, never performs for an audience. It simply remains still, and that stillness forces the mind to do the work. In horror cinema, tension is released through action. In reality, tension lingers because nothing definitive happens. The absence of proof becomes the breeding ground for speculation. In recent years, after the deaths of Ed and Lorraine Warren, renewed online discussions reignited interest in the doll's whereabouts and condition. Social media rumors even claimed it had disappeared, sparking waves of anxiety before being publicly clarified as false. That brief panic revealed something powerful. Even in a digital age driven by skepticism and scientific literacy, a decades-old haunted object can still trigger global reaction within hours. The myth has outgrown the museum. It now lives in collective imagination. From a modern analytical perspective, Annabelle represents a convergence point between folklore, media amplification, religious symbolism, and cognitive bias. Each element reinforces the others. Religious ritual surrounding the case adds gravity. Media adaptations add visual intensity. Personal testimonies add emotional authenticity. The human brain stitches these layers together into a cohesive narrative that feels larger than any single piece of evidence. Once that narrative is internalized, it becomes resilient. Attempts to debunk it often strengthen it by keeping the story alive. There is also the uncomfortable truth that humans crave mystery. In an era where satellites map the planet and algorithms predict behavior, unexplained stories restore a sense of the unknown. Annabelle survives not because of verified violence, but because of unresolved possibility. The doll embodies a question that refuses to close. What if something subtle and intelligent can influence reality without spectacle? What if danger does not need volume to exist? Whether you view the case as supernatural deception or as a masterclass in psychological contagion, its endurance is undeniable. The real Annabelle is not terrifying because of what it visibly does. It is terrifying because it challenges certainty. It invites you to doubt your senses just enough to feel uneasy. And once doubt enters the room, imagination follows. Perhaps that is why, decades later, a small Raggedy Ann doll behind glass still unsettles people more than the monstrous version on screen. Fiction shouts. The real story whispers. And whispers tend to travel further in the dark.